13, the body of 30-year-old Rebecca Hayes was found buried beneath the concrete floor of a basement in Pleasant Ridge, Maine. An investigation uncovered the shocking truth behind her abduction and murder, revealing the dark obsession of her co-worker, State Trooper Daniel Keene. In August 2011, at the Pleasant Ridge State Police Department, a partnership between the rookie officer and the decorated trooper began, a series of events that would ultimately spiral into betrayal, obsession, and tragedy. On March 6, 2013, the quiet town of Pleasant Ridge, Maine began its descent into a nightmare. Rebecca Hayes, a dedicated and beloved state trooper, was scheduled for her routine evening patrol shift at 7 p.m. Rebecca was known for her punctuality, her crisp professionalism, and her bright, unshakable demeanor that lifted the spirits of everyone around her. But that evening, the station grew unusually quiet. Minutes turned into hours, and Rebecca never arrived. At first, her colleagues assumed there had been a scheduling mix-up. Rebecca was reliable to a fault, never one to miss a shift without notifying someone. By 11 p.m., however, concern turned to alarm. Her supervisor, Sergeant Julian Mills, tried calling her phone repeatedly, but it went straight to voicemail. Rebecca's close friend and partner, Officer Sarah Calhoun, volunteered to check on her. Sarah had always been protective of Rebecca, almost like an older sister, and the thought of something being wrong filled her with unease. By midnight, Sarah arrived at Rebecca's modest home, a small white cottage on the outskirts of town. The driveway was empty and no lights were visible from the windows. Sarah knocked, called out, and finally circled the house, looking for any sign of life. But there was nothing. It was as if Rebecca had vanished. The next morning, March 7th, the department filed an official missing person report. Rebecca's colleagues were shaken. This wasn't like her. A team was quickly assembled to retrace her steps. Her fiancé, Nick Walters, was contacted, but he hadn't seen her since the morning of March 6th, when she had kissed him goodbye and left for a pre-shift workout. Her gym confirmed she had been there briefly, leaving at approximately 4:30 p.m. After that, she seemed to have disappeared into thin air. As the hours passed, tension grew. Rebecca's colleagues, men and women who had spent years working alongside her, found themselves unable to focus on anything but her absence. Some feared the worst, while others clung to the hope that she might simply have needed time away. But as night fell again, a grim cloud settled over the station. For Sarah and others who knew her best, it became clear that something terrible had happened. By March 8th, hope began to wane and fear gripped the town. At 9:45 a.m., a call came into the station that would change everything. A neighbor of State Trooper Daniel Keene, one of Rebecca's co-workers, reported suspicious activity. The caller, an elderly woman named Eleanor Brooks, mentioned seeing Daniel behaving oddly near his property over the past 2 days. He had been hauling bags of cement and construction materials into his basement late at night, behavior she found unusual, considering Daniel was known to be neat and orderly, not the type to take on messy home improvement projects without warning. Eleanor hesitated before calling, unsure if she was overreacting, but something in her gut told her it was worth reporting. Detectives assigned to Rebecca's case took the tip seriously. Daniel Keene was a familiar name to them, a fellow trooper with an unblemished record. His involvement seemed unthinkable, yet they couldn't ignore the lead. Within hours, officers arrived at Daniel's rural home, a secluded property surrounded by towering pines and far from prying eyes. The house was eerily quiet, the driveway empty. Daniel wasn't home, but something about the stillness of the place felt wrong. As officers entered with a search warrant, the smell hit them first. A sharp metallic tang mixed with the acrid odor of chemicals. It was subtle at first, but as they moved deeper into the house, it became overwhelming. In the kitchen, they noticed small but strange details. Duct tape discarded in the trash, a coffee cup sitting on the counter, still stained with a dried ring of dark liquid. But it was the basement door, locked and bolted, that drew their attention. One officer noted that the lock seemed new, its shiny metal surface standing out against the worn wood of the frame. When the door was forced open, the stench became unbearable. Descending the creaky wooden stairs, officers found themselves in a stark, dimly lit basement. At first, it appeared unremarkable, a workshop cluttered with tools and storage boxes. But the far corner told a different story. There, the cement floor was fresh, its pale gray surface still slightly damp. A forensic team was immediately called to the scene, and by 3 p.m., The basement became the focal point of an excavation. What they unearthed would haunt everyone present. Beneath the concrete lay Rebecca Hayes. Her body, wrapped tightly in plastic, bore the unmistakable signs of violence. Bruises mottled her wrists and ankles, indicating she had been restrained. Her arms showed defensive wounds, slashes and deep scrapes suggesting a desperate struggle for her life. There were faint chemical burns on her skin, likely from attempts to obscure evidence. But it was her face that stayed with the officers. Despite the brutality of her death, her expression seemed frozen in defiance, as if her final moments were spent fighting with every ounce of strength she had. The news spread quickly through the department, hitting each officer like a physical blow. For Sarah Calhoun, the discovery was personal. Rebecca wasn't just a colleague, she was a friend, a confidant, someone she had trusted with her life on countless shifts. The thought of her being buried beneath the home of a man they had all worked alongside left Sarah reeling. By 4:30 p.m., Daniel Keene was officially declared a suspect. His colleagues, still grappling with the shock, combed through his personnel file, searching for signs they might have missed. But Daniel had been meticulous, blending into their ranks so seamlessly that no one had suspected the darkness lurking beneath his polished exterior. Rebecca's autopsy began later that evening, revealing even more grim details about her final hours. The duct tape residue on her wrists matched the roll found in Daniel's trash. Bruising patterns suggested she had been kept captive for nearly 2 days, her attempts to resist growing weaker as time went on. The case was no longer just a tragedy, it was a betrayal. The department that prided itself on protecting the community now faced the horrifying truth. One of their own had committed the unthinkable. As night fell on March 8th, a small group of detectives gathered in silence, each grappling with the same chilling question. How could they have missed it? What had driven Daniel Keene, a trusted state trooper, to commit such a heinous crime against someone they all cared for? And how had he managed to conceal his darkness for so long? The answers would unravel in the days to come, but for now, the department could only brace itself for the storm ahead. It was the summer of 2011, a year before everything would begin to unravel. Daniel Keene was, on the surface, everything one could hope for in a state trooper. At 32 years old, he was seasoned, disciplined, and dedicated to his work. His file was spotless. Commendations for quick thinking in dangerous situations, glowing reviews from supervisors, and a track record of going above and beyond to help his community. Yet, beneath the professional exterior, Daniel lived a life of quiet isolation. He had no close friends in the department, but no one thought it strange. Daniel was the kind of man who thrived in solitude. He preferred patrols in the quietest parts of town and rarely joined his colleagues for drinks after shifts. They often described him as reliable but distant, a man who did his job well but never opened up. What they didn't know was that Daniel's solitude wasn't by choice. It was rooted in wounds that had never healed. Daniel had grown up in a chaotic household. His mother left when he was just 7 years old, walking out one evening without a word and never coming back. His father, already struggling with alcoholism, sank deeper into his addiction, leaving Daniel to fend for himself. By the time he was a teenager, Daniel had developed a deep, pathological fear of abandonment. Every time someone left his life, it reaffirmed his belief that he wasn't good enough to keep them. When Rebecca Hayes walked into the department in August 2011, something shifted in Daniel. Rebecca was 28 years old, fresh out of the academy and full of ambition. Her confidence radiated, but it wasn't arrogance. It was the kind of warmth that drew people to her. She was the type of person who remembered everyone's birthday, who offered help before it was even asked, and who could diffuse tense situations with a simple smile. Rebecca was partnered with Daniel for her first 6 months, a decision made by their supervisor to pair the rookie with a seasoned officer. Daniel was polite and professional, treating her as he did everyone else. But as the weeks passed, his feelings began to change. At first, it was admiration. He noticed how Rebecca handled difficult calls with grace, how she never flinched under pressure, and how she always seemed to have a kind word for everyone. What started as respect quickly turned into fascination. Daniel found himself drawn to her in ways he didn't understand. He admired her laughter, her compassion, and the way her hazel eyes lit up when she talked about her fiancé, Nick. She would share small anecdotes about her life, how she and Nick had been together since high school, their plans to buy a house, their dream of traveling the world together. Daniel smiled and nodded, but inside, resentment began to simmer. By December 2011, Daniel's thoughts had grown darker. He started going out of his way to spend time with Rebecca. He'd volunteer to stay late if it meant working alongside her, or offer to drive her home if her car was in the shop. He began keeping small mementos, coffee cups she had left on her desk, a hair tie she had forgotten in the patrol car. Each item became a token of the fantasy life he was building in his mind. To Rebecca, Daniel was simply a kind and supportive partner. She often spoke highly of him to others, praising his dedication and patience. She had no idea that her casual friendliness was feeding an obsession she couldn't see. By early 2012, Daniel's behavior began to shift in ways that others might have noticed, had they looked closely. He became more withdrawn from his colleagues, but more attentive to Rebecca. He started asking subtle, probing questions about her relationship with Nick. Questions about whether they argued, what she wished Nick did differently, or if she ever thought about delaying the wedding. At the same time, Daniel's obsession started to bleed into his work. He used his position as a state trooper to monitor Rebecca's movements. When they weren't partnered, he would find ways to track her patrol routes, showing up unexpectedly at the same locations. He found her work laptop one evening, left unattended in the break room, and installed spyware that allowed him to see her emails and messages. He justified these actions in his mind as a way to protect her, convinced that she needed him to keep her safe. By the summer of 2012, Rebecca and Nick announced their wedding date, set for May 2013. The news sent Daniel into a spiral. His fantasies of a future with Rebecca clashed violently with reality. He began driving past her house late at night, watching as the lights turned off one by one. He would sit outside for hours, imagining her inside with Nick, and it filled him with a rage he couldn't control. On September 15th, 2012, after a late shift, Daniel cornered Rebecca in the station parking lot. For the first time, he let his emotions slip. He confessed his feelings, telling her that she deserved better than Nick, and that he could give her the life she truly wanted. Rebecca, stunned, tried to let him down gently, assuring him that he had misunderstood her friendliness. But Daniel didn't see it that way. Her rejection wasn't just a refusal, it was abandonment. A wound that cut as deeply as his mother's departure years ago. From that moment on, his obsession turned dangerous. Daniel stopped attending therapy sessions he had been quietly taking for years. His colleagues noticed he seemed more irritable, less composed, but no one connected it to Rebecca. The department was stretched thin, dealing with a staffing crisis and an influx of cases. Daniel's descent into darkness went unnoticed. By December 2012, Daniel had started planning. In his mind, Rebecca wasn't rejecting him. She was trapped by societal constraints, by a toxic relationship, by a life that wasn't hers to live. He convinced himself that he needed to save her. He began purchasing supplies, a soundproofing kit for his basement, heavy-duty locks, and restraints. Each item felt like a step closer to their new beginning. He rehearsed conversations in his mind, imagining how Rebecca would thank him once she realized he had freed her from her old life. The disciplined officer who once upheld the law had become the monster he had spent his career protecting people from. March 3rd, 2013, was the day he decided to act. By March 6th, 2013, Rebecca Hayes had been trapped in Daniel Keene's basement for nearly 3 days. The soundproofed walls muffled her cries, but she hadn't stopped fighting. Despite the physical and emotional exhaustion, Rebecca clung to the hope that someone would find her. She thought about Nick, her fiancé, who must have noticed she was missing. She thought about Sarah, her partner at work, who would never stop looking for her. These thoughts gave her strength, even as Daniel's delusions suffocated the air around her. Daniel, on the other hand, was unraveling. His plan had not gone as smoothly as he had imagined. He had envisioned Rebecca growing to trust him, understanding his intentions, and accepting their new life together. But Rebecca's resilience was something he hadn't accounted for. She resisted him at every turn, her defiance a constant reminder that his fantasy was slipping further out of reach. Daniel tried to convince himself that he just needed more time, but deep down, he felt control slipping through his fingers. That afternoon, Daniel made a critical mistake. Distracted by his growing panic, he left the basement door slightly ajar. Rebecca noticed immediately. It wasn't much, just a narrow opening, but it was enough. Summoning every ounce of strength she had left, she screamed. The sound cut through the silence of the isolated property, faint but desperate. At 2:17 p.m., Eleanor Brooks, Daniel's elderly neighbor, was sitting by her kitchen window when she thought she heard something. At first, she dismissed it, assuming it was the television or the wind rustling through the trees. But then she heard it again, faint, high-pitched, and unmistakably human. Eleanor's heart raced. She knew Daniel lived alone, and the sound didn't seem like it belonged there. Unsure but concerned, she decided to call the police, her voice trembling as she relayed what she had heard. Back in the basement, Rebecca's hope flared briefly, but the moment was short-lived. Daniel, realizing his error, rushed to seal the door. The screams stopped, the silence returning as quickly as it had been broken. Daniel's face twisted with rage and fear. He knew the sound could have reached someone outside. The very thought made his stomach churn. For the first time since taking Rebecca, Daniel panicked. His carefully constructed fantasy had shattered, and in its place was cold, unrelenting reality. If someone had heard her, it was only a matter of time before the police came knocking. In his mind, there was only one solution: to end the very thing that threatened to expose him. At 4:45 p.m., Daniel entered the basement. Rebecca's defiance hadn't waned, but her body betrayed her exhaustion. She could see the shift in him immediately. There was no longer any pretense of care or control. He had decided what he needed to do, and Rebecca knew it. She fought, but her strength was no match for his. In those final, brutal moments, Daniel silenced her forever, leaving the basement in an eerie, heavy stillness. But the act didn't bring him relief. Instead, it sent him deeper into panic. He knew he had to hide what he had done. The soundproof basement became his makeshift burial ground. At 6:30 p.m., Daniel began the grim process of erasing Rebecca's presence. He wrapped her body in thick plastic, securing it tightly with duct tape. The plastic crinkled under his trembling hands as he worked in silence. The only sound, the occasional scrape of his boots on the concrete floor. Over the next few hours, Daniel poured layer after layer of cement over Rebecca's grave. The fresh concrete glistened under the dim basement light, its surface smooth and cold. He worked methodically, his training as a state trooper guiding his every move. He believed he had covered every detail, convinced that no one would ever find her. By the time he finished, it was past midnight, and the basement was eerily quiet once again. By March 7th, Rebecca's disappearance was the top story in Pleasant Ridge, dominating local headlines and news broadcasts. Her friends and colleagues were frantic, unable to reconcile the vibrant, dependable officer they knew with the idea that she was simply gone. Nick Walters, her fiancé, had been vocal from the start, pleading for information and offering a reward for anyone who could help find her. The police department, now under intense public scrutiny, ramped up their efforts. Daniel Keene, meanwhile, played his role flawlessly. At 9 a.m., he joined his colleagues at the station, pretending to share their concern. He offered to assist with search efforts, volunteering to canvass areas near Rebecca's home. His calm demeanor and willingness to help threw off suspicion initially. He was, after all, one of their own. But small inconsistencies began to surface. On March 6th, Daniel had taken an uncharacteristic leave of absence, citing a vague personal emergency. His alibi for that day was thin, and his normally precise reports had been rushed and incomplete. While most of his colleagues were too preoccupied to notice, Detective Sarah Calhoun felt something was off. The breakthrough came in the form of Eleanor Brooks's tip. By March 8th, forensic analysts had reviewed her report and determined that the cries she heard could not be dismissed. Armed with a warrant, officers arrived at Daniel's property that afternoon. The secluded home, once unremarkable, now carried an ominous weight. Inside, the search team worked quickly. The house was meticulously clean, but the basement caught their attention immediately. The smell of chemicals lingered, and the smooth cement floor seemed too new, too deliberate. The forensic team began their excavation at 3:45 p.m., and within hours, their worst fears were confirmed. Rebecca's body was discovered at 6:12 p.m., her plastic-wrapped form buried beneath inches of concrete. The room fell silent as officers processed the grim sight. They also found the clues Rebecca had etched into the wall before her death: Daniel's badge number and the word "help," scratched into the surface with what little strength she had left. When the news reached the station, it sent shockwaves through the department. Daniel Keene, the man they had trusted and worked alongside, was arrested that same evening. His calm facade cracked as officers led him away in handcuffs, his silence a stark contrast to the chaos swirling around him. Rebecca's final act of resistance, the scratched clues, sealed Daniel's fate. The betrayal, the horror, and the unimaginable loss left a scar on the department and the town, one that would never fully heal. The trial of Daniel Keene began on August 3, 2015, and quickly became a national spectacle, capturing the morbid curiosity of the public. Rebecca Hayes, once simply seen as a victim of a terrible crime, had come to symbolize something larger: the profound betrayal of trust, the fragility of safety, and the devastating cost of unchecked darkness. Her story was no longer just a tragedy. It was a cautionary tale. The courtroom brimmed with reporters, locals, and distant onlookers who had followed the case with bated breath. As the trial unfolded, the chilling details of Daniel's crime unraveled. Prosecutors introduced Daniel's journals as the centerpiece of their case. Within those pages lay a disturbing chronicle of obsession. His entries were both haunting and methodical, documenting his growing fixation with Rebecca, someone who had trusted him as a colleague. His fantasies painted an unhinged vision of a life he believed they should share, while his meticulous plans for her abduction revealed the premeditated nature of his actions. This wasn't a crime of passion or impulse. It was a cold, calculated execution of a twisted delusion. Equally harrowing was the physical evidence that painted a picture of Rebecca's final moments. The courtroom sat in stunned silence as photographs and forensic analysis revealed the scratches etched into the basement walls, desperate marks of a struggle against an unthinkable fate. The fresh concrete covering the site where Rebecca's body was buried told the rest of the story. She had fought valiantly, but Daniel's plan had left little chance for escape. The defense, grasping at straws, sought to humanize Daniel, framing him as a product of his circumstances. They presented testimony about his troubled upbringing, marked by his mother's abandonment and his father's cold neglect, arguing that his damaged psyche drove him to commit the crime. But even the most sympathetic ears in the courtroom couldn't overlook the overwhelming evidence of intent and the chilling precision with which he had acted. On October 20th, 2015, after weeks of emotional testimony and damning evidence, the jury rendered its verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Daniel Keene was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the judge read the verdict, Daniel sat motionless, his face betraying no hint of remorse or reaction. Across the courtroom, Rebecca's family clung to one another, their quiet sobs echoing the depth of their grief. For them, justice had been served, but no verdict could ever fill the void left by Rebecca's death. In the aftermath of the trial, ripples of the tragedy spread through the community. The police department faced harsh scrutiny for failing to detect the warning signs within their own ranks. In response, new mental health initiatives were introduced to better assess the psychological well-being of officers, aiming to prevent future tragedies. But for those closest to Rebecca, these changes came too late. Her fiancé, Nick, overwhelmed by the weight of his grief, left town in search of solace far from the haunting reminders of what he had lost. Sarah Calhoun, Rebecca's closest confidant at the station, opted for early retirement, unable to face the daily reminder of her absence. The station, once a place of camaraderie, was now marked by a palpable emptiness. The house where Rebecca's final moments unfolded became a grim monument to the horrors of the crime. Abandoned and neglected, its boarded-up windows and overgrown driveway seemed to warn away anyone who dared come close. Locals avoided the property, calling it cursed, a stark reminder of the evil that had once resided within its walls. As the town struggled to move forward, an unsettling question lingered: how many others, hidden behind badges and uniforms, might carry the same darkness that had consumed Daniel Keene? Rebecca's story had exposed a harsh truth: that monsters don't always look like strangers lurking in the shadows. Sometimes they sit beside us, wearing the same uniform, speaking the same language of duty and service. And sometimes we don't see them until it's far too late.